hard to make, and they're calling for help on ventilators. On Tuesday, we announced $315 million in federal funding for Michigan to increase testing and contact tracing and disease surveillance. So we're going all out. We want to make sure everything's absolutely perfect. A lot of people are looking into other things, like, as an example, vaccines and therapeutics. Therapeutically, we're doing some things that are, I think, going to be released pretty soon that are amazing, and for the cure, ultimately for the cure. And I think the cure, the therapeutics, and the vaccines that are happening right now, I think you're going to be very impressed over the next number of weeks. Today they had an announcement that was a very important announcement, Ben. I think you saw that. I signed legislation providing over $600 billion in massive relief for workers and small businesses, including at least $60 billion for smaller financial institutions, including those that serve minority communities. One of the beautiful things that Scott Turner has done, and he's a real leader, he's led so well from his days at the NFL, where he was known as being fast, but maybe even more than speed, being tough. He was a tough guy. People told me that had to tackle him and had to go against him. They weren't thrilled. I mentioned your name. They weren't happy. But Scott's done an incredible job with opportunity zones. He worked with me and with Senator Tim Scott. I have to tell you, what a great guy from South Carolina. He had an idea, and it was an idea that we took and we made it work. And I want to thank you for the great job you're doing, Scott.
Thank you, sir.
Before the virus, African-American unemployment reached its lowest level in history, and African-American poverty reached its lowest level in history. We never had more people from the African-American community working in this country. It was almost, in terms of total, almost 160 million people, and African-Americans set a new record. Out of that 160, African-American unemployment and employment was the best. They were the best numbers that we've ever had. That goes for many others also. Asian Americans, you know that. We set records with Asian Americans and Hispanic Americans. And then we had the plague flow in from China, and now we're doing it again. And you're going to see some incredible numbers starting in June, July. You're going to see some incredible numbers because it's coming back, and it's coming back fast. I spoke to CDC today about churches. Got to get our churches open. We got to get our country open. These governors have to start doing what they're supposed to be doing. Together, we passed also criminal justice reform, which is a big deal, and that's something that could not be passed without us. And I will tell you, I have a very good friend of mine. And would you come in from Cleveland?
Yeah.
Well, to be here, I'm very impressed with you.
My buddy is here.
Thank you. Well, your buddy is here. I'll tell you that.
My president.
But we did pass criminal justice reform. You were one of my advisors.
Yes, sir.
And
prison reform as well.
Prison reform, a lot of things that nobody else would have done and nobody else could have done. And the Democrats, I don't even know if they tried, but if they did, they couldn't get it done. So we got it done. Thank you very much. We delivered record funding for HBCUs and made the funding permanent. So every year I would have people come from the black colleges, small, large, all sizes, and they would come in, colleges and universities, and they'd ask me for money. After the third year, I said, Ben, I said, what's going on?
Since COVID-19 issues for mobile deposit fees to late payment fees, we've waived many of those. And as a CDFI that focuses heavily on providing financial literacy, financial counseling, what we call financial development services, we are really pushing our financial counseling, and we're doing that more and more through Zoom. And so our credit counselors are actually talking to people via Zoom from their home to people's homes, really trying to help them weather the impact of COVID-19. So all in all, I would say that in the Gulf communities that we serve, we have faced tough economic conditions for a very long time. The markets that we serve look very, very much like what Amanda talked about earlier, with double-digit unemployment, even pre-COVID, when employment rates throughout the country were much less. So these markets have faced higher unemployment, higher job loss, higher poverty as a result of structural inequalities and deficiencies in our economic system. And this hasn't gone away. My fear is that long-term impact on COVID-19 would only broaden these inequalities in income and in wealth in the communities that we serve. And you can look at the research by Sergo Foundation, which really talked about those communities that are vulnerable, have a community vulnerability index. And it's not necessarily the communities that are having the most health impact from COVID-19, is those that had a number of structural challenges like the Arkansas Mississippi Delta that would have a long-term impact of COVID-19. In fact, the FEMA disaster studies show that 40% of the businesses that are affected by a disaster never return. And of those 6% that do return, about 1/3 don't last 2 years after the disaster. So we're concerned about the impact. We're resilient. We're going to try to make it through, but the structural inequalities in our system really make it difficult for the markets that we serve. And I really appreciate you all inviting us to be a part of this conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Darren. It's a good reminder that financial services are often emergency services when we have national emergencies such as this. I think we're all proud also of the role we've been playing, helping to make sure those ACH transfers get there and helping banks and CDFIs get access to their PPP funds. I'm wondering whether Mickey wanted to come in on that front.
Yes, thank you, Lael. And Darren, it's wonderful to hear those stories of you meeting the needs of your customers and waiving fees and meeting the needs of the unbanked and underbanked to cash their stimulus checks. That's the role that I see community banks playing across the country, and it's refreshing to hear you reaffirm those activities. I wondered if you might be able to cast a little light on the differences that you're seeing between rural areas and the economic impacts you're seeing there, or any developments, versus your more urban areas. And is there anything more that the Fed can do to manage the current environment there?
Governor Bowman, thank you for that question, and I really appreciate your always bringing the angle of community banking as you think about the work that having been a community banker. So Southern, the markets we serve, by most accounts, would all be considered rural. The largest town that we serve is probably a city of 45,000 people. Now, we call that urban or large, but we also serve towns, of less than 1,000 people. We do see some differences in those communities. So those more populated communities where people have access to more business technical assistance, have access to CPAs and other business technical providers, they're having an opportunity to really access those PPP programs. So I was talking just recently to a gentleman in Forest City, Arkansas, one of the most economically challenged communities in our state of Arkansas, and he had about 15 of his customers he was working with that had not been able to access the PPP program, and I really started digging in, trying to figure out, could we help him? And these were businesses that unfortunately have relied on informal accounting systems, cash-based businesses, or even some who have just a complete mistrust of banks and don't have a banking relationship. And you see that in more of your rural, underserved communities. So there is somewhat of a difference, and we're trying to figure out ways to help them through our nonprofit loan fund. We've created a philanthropic grant program where we're trying to provide forgivable loans, or really grants, to those who've not been able to access the PPP program. Those dollars are very limited, but they're important because we know so many people have not had access to the PPP program.
Thank you very much. So what I'm going to do now is turn to some of our small business or business owners. I'm going to start with Bob Ukrop, who is Chairman and CEO of Ukrop's Homestyle Foods. Located in Richmond, the company employs 400 associates and produces high-quality, chilled, prepared foods and baked goods for supermarket chains that we all have heard of: Food Lion, Harris Teeter, Kroger, Publix, Wegmans. The family-owned business was formed in 2010 after the family sold its previous 73-year-old retail business, which were supermarket stores. So, Bobby, 1 year ago, I heard you talk about how your food preparation firm couldn't raise wages because you couldn't easily pass on those price increases to your customers, given the thin margins in grocery and fierce competition from other sellers. You also described challenges you were facing in finding and retaining good employees who could maintain high-quality food standards while also working in challenging conditions. I'm wondering what kinds of changes you've been seeing with the COVID crisis in terms of working conditions and employee availability, and how have the demand for your products and your pricing and margins changed in this period?
Thanks for the opportunity to participate today. And it's great to hear what Darren did most recently, but the work his organization is doing to help folks. It's wonderful to hear that. Our sales are down 25% since the COVID-19 crisis began. And of course, some people are in a lot worse shape than that. But the reasons why, although supermarkets report that sales are up significantly, there has been a shift in what consumers are buying, resulting in lower margins for retailers. Are reluctant to go to the grocery store frequently, consumers are spending much more per trip as they buy more shelf-stable products and more proteins from the meat department. For our company, sales of fresh products to support food service areas like salad bars and hot food bars went to zero as stores stopped offering these options. Sales of packaged, chill-prepared foods, including entrees, sides, and deli salads, have remained strong. However, sales of sandwiches and green salads, most often purchased by office workers for lunch, are down significantly. Sales of baked goods, especially iced and decorated cakes, are much lower because of fewer gatherings and celebrations. Consumers are using the extra time at home themselves to bake pies and cakes. But there are even more unintended consequences. For example, the huge disruption of the food industry supply chain. Many food retailers' distribution centers were overwhelmed by demand for cleaning supplies, paper goods, and frozen foods like pizza. So in some cases, our products were not deemed to be priority items, and they stopped ordering. Also, to avoid hoarding by individual stores and the store personnel who might try to stock up on extremely fast-selling items, some retailers prevented employees from making adjustments to computer-generated orders. As for pricing and margins, not much has changed since last year when we instituted a 2% price increase and raised wages 3%. Now, in our business, under normal circumstances, it has taken more than 6 months for our retail customers, our partners, to accept and then execute the price increase. Before the COVID-19 crisis arrived, we had planned to implement a wage increase this fall. That initiative is up in the air at this point. The only price increase we anticipate would relate to recent spikes in proteins, especially beef, as the supply chain has been very disrupted. As for our workforce and our working conditions, our associates are accustomed to stringent health and sanitation protocols, and the temperature in our kitchen is 35 degrees. All of us have heightened awareness about health and safety. Our associates, however, want to work. And we did receive support from a PPP loan. That loan was very timely as it enabled us to keep everyone on the payroll when sales were significantly down and much uncertainty was present. We applied for the PPP loan to Atlantic Union Bank, the largest community bank in Virginia, on the first day. Pleased to report that within a week we had the money. And that gave us confidence in our decision to keep all of our associates on the payroll. Frankly, I was amazed how quickly the delivery system worked. Numerous business friends and area organizations had similar experiences because of their relationships with locally controlled banks. For Ucross Homestyle Foods, that PPP loan is a bridge to the summer when we anticipate somewhat of a sales rebound. Unfortunately, many smaller businesses did not have a personal relationship with a bank or even a bank. Some may have known only a teller, and others had no connectivity. These businesses really, really need help. And back to our wonderful associates. Our absenteeism rate has not changed. One reason our associates come to work is they need a stable paycheck because many also work part-time jobs. And a good number of those jobs no longer exist, as been mentioned earlier. In addition, other members of their family may have lost jobs, so a secure job at Ucross is appreciated. Now, a number of our associates do get irritated. Some of their out-of-work friends and family members are making more money by drawing unemployment benefits, which include the temporary federal subsidy. We strongly believe the vast majority, and this was said by other people, the vast majority of people want to work.
Thank you very much, Bobby, for that update. I'm going to pause and see whether I have any questions from my colleagues. And if not, what I'm going to do is go on to hear from Joanne Chang and then pause again because both Joanne and Bobby are running businesses, and so similar questions might arise. So Joanne Chang is the co-owner of Flower Bakery and Myers Chang, along with her husband and business partner, Christopher Myers. She's also a cookbook author, and her most recent cookbook, Pastry Love, has just been nominated for Best Pastry Book by the James Beard Foundation for 2020. So congratulations, Joanne. Joanne, last May, you spoke of the squeeze your Flower Bakery restaurants faced, stuck between raising the wages you pay in order to attract workers in the Boston area and intense competition in the restaurant business that made it difficult for you to increase prices. With social distancing, the landscape for restaurants has changed dramatically. How have you adapted your restaurant business model to COVID requirements, and what does this mean for the people that you employ?
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here. Thank you, Governor and Chair. So Christopher and I own and operate 8 sit-down cafes. We were in the middle of opening up a ninth and a sit-down restaurant. Pre-COVID, we saw between 10 and 12,000 people a day. And we made the decision to shut down all of the locations for about 5 weeks, middle of March, because Massachusetts, especially some areas in Boston, were considered a hot spot. So we ended up furloughing 490 out of 500 team members immediately. We went from over 100,000 in sales daily to 0 just overnight. And we needed that time to figure out how to operate safely for our teams and our guests, amid this crisis. Luckily for us, we are a popular takeout spot, both the bakeries and the restaurants. So to answer your question of adapting the COVID requirements, honestly, there haven't really been COVID requirements that have been established for cafes and restaurants. So, we are kind of playing it by ear and doing our very best to anticipate and act on we can parse together just from reading, everything we can and watching everything we can. We're starting to open our locations up slowly. And at this point, about half of our locations are back open, and our sales are down about, I wish they were at Bobby's percentage at 25%, but we're actually down about 75 to 80%. And so because of that, and because of social distancing, we've actually reduced our staffing by 80%. Again, we had furloughed everybody, and now we're slowly starting to bring people back, and we're at about 80% of what we were. We have reduced our operating hours at the bakeries and the restaurants that are open because we're trying to limit the number of shifts, trying to minimize, overlap and all of that stuff. We're also limiting staffing to people who can get to work by either car or by walking or biking or scooter. We're not allowing people to take public transportation or Uber just yet because we don't feel comfortable. They don't feel comfortable, to be honest. And so that has put a little bit of a damper on who we can bring back. But we have actually changed a little bit and started a driving department. And so we've rented a couple vans, and we are physically picking people up, going to subway stops where they used to take the T into work, and now we're acting as the T. We are also reworking people's responsibilities. What Duke was saying earlier about how the stronger skill set people will end up probably having a little bit more success overall in all of this. We're definitely seeing that in that the first people to come back have been managers, and they will probably end up being redeployed and doing many more things than what they were before managing because there's not as many people to manage, honestly. We just need more boots on the ground. And so their job responsibilities are going to shift a little bit. We're selling, similar to what Bobby said, we're selling so much more stuff online than we ever were. We're also pushing to sell groceries. I mean, we're a bakery cafe, we're a restaurant, and we're selling quarts of flour, quarts of uncooked rice, make your own chocolate cream pie kits, anything and everything to just try to get some sales in the door. To address the May comments about raising wages and raising prices, we did raise wages in the short term because, as I think Bobby was just saying, so many of our team members could make more on unemployment, and we recognized that by coming back and helping us reopen, they were going to take a pay cut. So we have temporarily raised wages, but we don't anticipate we will be able to continue that. We're probably going to have to stop that middle of June, which coincides with when our PPP loan ends. With the cost of rent and benefits and food and just everything that's going on, really the only model that does work is for us to increase our prices. But, you know, is that sustainable? We're not really sure. You know, time will tell. We're starting discussions with our landlords on rent and what that will look like in the future. Rent used to be between 5 and 10% of our sales, and now it's 20 to 25%. So that's certainly not sustainable. In terms of what this means for the people that we employed, for the ones who are currently working, they are all honestly wondering if they should be, because they think maybe they should go back on unemployment where they will continue to get some assistance. But they are, I think, again, sort of like Bobby's team, they are recognizing that they're a part of trying to help the economy kind of get back on track and to help our company get back on track. Many of our staff members are students working part-time, counter-help baristas, and many of them just went home. Boston is a huge college town, and as soon as all of the universities shut down, they all went home. And then, honestly, for the people who are now currently working, tend to be the people who were not able to apply for benefits. They were the first ones to raise their hands and saying, we want to come back in any way possible. They don't have any safety net. They rely 100% on their jobs to pay for food and rent. So these are the people who want to come back now. So we're doing our best to employ as many of them as we can, and we're pushing to increase our sales volume so that we can, you know, continue to bring back as many as possible. So we certainly hope to be able to grow to the point where we need everybody back, but realistically, with social distancing, we don't think that's going to be the case.
Thank you, Joanne. So questions for Joanne or Bobby?
For Joanne, if you went over this, I may have missed it, but so have you been able to reopen or keep open any of the restaurants? And how are you thinking about that? I mean, that's obviously the part, that's where an awful lot of the layoffs have been happening at the national level. Very, very difficult part of the economy right now.
So we've reopened 4 of the cafes and the restaurant, and we are only doing pickup, pre-order pickup, and takeout. And so you can't physically come into the restaurant. We're not allowed to in Boston right now, but even when the governor allows us to, we don't know if we're going to let people come in. We're going to see if we can continue with this takeout model. But we've had to reduce the number of staff in the restaurant because of social distancing. So we used to have between 13 and 15 people physically working at the restaurant at any one time, and now we're at about 8. And we have half of the kitchen is now in the dining room because we need to separate all of the kitchen prep.
The cafes in the near term, then you're working on the business model you have. You don't feel like you're weeks or months away from being able to reopen to the public in a way that where they come in and eat yet, or what's your thinking on that business model?
In terms of allowing people to physically come into the cafes and the restaurants, that's probably, I'm guessing, at least a month away. I mean, eventually we will open to the public and let them come in. But our business model really was, I mean, like most restaurants, it's pack as many people as you can in one space, you know, big waiting area for people to stand at the bar or near the sandwich area where they're waiting for sandwiches. So we know we're going to have to limit that when we do physically allow people to come into the cafes and restaurants.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. So now I'm going to turn to Janie Barrera, who knows small business finances from the other side. She is founding president and CEO of Lift Fund, and since 1994, Lift Fund has provided loans and management training to enterprises from startups to long-established businesses and operates in 13 states in the Southeast region of the U.S. Lift Fund has dispersed more than 21,000 loans, totaling more than $300 million to unbanked and underbanked small businesses with a 94% repayment rate. So Janie, at our conference last June, you talked about the small business borrowers your CDFI is serving in the Colonias, in the Delta, in other areas in the Southeast, and you emphasized that with FICO scores of around 580, and here I'm quoting from you, the interest rate is not the most important thing to our borrower, it is access to capital. With COVID having especially devastating impacts on the finances of small businesses, what are you seeing with your borrowers? How much can they fall back on cash reserves or family and friends to stay current on their payments? How is that affecting their own incomes and their ability to retain their employees? And how accessible is the PPP program for them and for you?
Thank you, Governor Brainard, and thank you for the opportunity to share this information. Access to capital is still the most important need for our small business owners. In the 26 years that I've been president and CEO of Lift Fund, I've never seen a greater need in our communities. Lift Fund's headquarters is located in San Antonio. You may have seen an image that was put out on national television recently about the lineup of cars at the food bank because of the city of San Antonio has a poverty rate of about 25%. And so there are many people without jobs. And so if you think about the portfolio in not only San Antonio, but across our footprint, it's mostly, service businesses and restaurants and gyms. And so these businesses have been devastated. So what Lift Fund did, first of all, was that we gave 4 months of deferred payments to the business owners in our portfolio. And then we began working with municipalities and offering grants and small loans to businesses with less than 10 employees and annual revenues of less than $1 million. The loans are up to $25,000 at 0% interest, and there are no payments for 4 months. We started making these loans in late March. Lift Fund is mostly a micro lender. Annually, we make about 1,000 loans dispersing between $25 and $30 million. In the last 2 months, we have made over 800 loans totaling more than $25 million. This includes the PPP and COVID-related loans only. In the PPP portfolio, we have 539 loans. The average loan size is about $30,000. But we've experienced PPP loans of as little as $1,000. So our challenge right now is reaching those businesses that are scared of taking on debt. They don't, with this insecurity, they don't know that it can become working capital as well. So it's that whole education that we're doing right now with our small business owners across our footprint. On the COVID loans, our average is about $20,000. Lift Fund also received donations to make grants for small business owners. We received about $1.7 million in grants that we distributed back as grants to over 300 businesses. We also received a special grant for veterans. This grant paid for 4 months of principal and interest payments for the veterans in the portfolio. So the majority of these loans that I'm describing and grants have gone to minorities, 76% minorities, and 40% women. The work is not over because now the municipalities are receiving federal dollars, and we are here to help them get these dollars into the hands of the small business owners. We took a survey this week, actually, of 300 of our borrowers in our portfolio. 56% stated that they had temporarily or partially closed their business. 56% have experienced a reduction in their non-business household income, and 18% are not sure if they will be open in January. So we are working hard to see how we can help them keep alive. So the funds that the municipalities are receiving right now are grants that they're receiving and that the municipalities have to put out to the small business communities in grants so that they can rehire or hire new employees, buy merchandise, prepare the business for the social distancing that we have to have in place, as you've heard already. But we see our job as not only providing the access to capital, but also to helping them come up with plans to survive this next year. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamie. Any questions?
I'm curious. Are you also, like Darren, pretty much able to meet the demand for PPP loans? It sounds like that's been something you've been able to do a bit of as well.
Yes, Chair Powell, the demand has slowed. And so again, it's the more sophisticated businesses, the ones that actually have payroll, third party, or they use QuickBooks. You know, that was a piece of cake for them to be able to access the PPP funds. Now it's really getting into the grassroots, small businesses that we're trying to reach. Every day, you know, we're out there, you know, being on webinars, being on television, saying it's okay to apply, you need to apply. And a lot of sole proprietorships as well, you know, the guy who cuts the grass, or the woman who had maybe a small hair shop of her own. They said, well, I don't have any employees. Well, no, you're the employee. You qualify for a PPP loan. Oh, okay. How do you do that? We go to Schedule C, look at, you know, line 31, you know, divide that by 12, and so on. So we've had to do so much education, sir, to be able to reach that group of folks that traditionally are not being located.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. So let me turn now, I think we'll go to households, and I'm going to turn to Aaron Gornstein, who's the president and CEO of Preservation of Affordable Housing. POA is a national nonprofit that owns and manages nearly 12,000 affordable apartments in 11 states and DC. Aaron also serves as the chair of the Board of Stewards of Affordable Housing for the Future and New Lease for Homeless Families in Massachusetts. Aaron, last May, you spoke about how important securing and retaining a job is for the economic mobility of the 18,000 residents in the affordable apartments your organization provides in New England and around the country. You stated that affordable housing organizations need to think much more about workforce and jobs and how to move people up the economic ladder. We have to focus a lot more on job retention and promotion. So people can succeed in maintaining the job, we need to focus on transitioning people from rental housing to home ownership as much as possible. So how are your residents facing today? How are COVID-related financial stresses affecting the residents of these affordable apartments? And what are you seeing in terms of job losses and the ability they have to make their rent payments?
Well, thank you for giving me this opportunity to share my thoughts on the housing challenges facing the country in light of the pandemic. POA provides affordable apartments to nearly 20,000 low-income families, seniors, people with disabilities, with average incomes of approximately $16,000 annually. The health and safety of our residents is our paramount concern, and we've implemented many new protocols at our properties to minimize their health risks. We're also helping our residents to meet urgent needs by conducting wellness calls, coordinating food assistance, helping them to apply for unemployment benefits, and also addressing mental health and social isolation, particularly for the seniors. And like most other low-income families, our residents are managing through the crisis, but they're facing significant challenges at the same time. Chief among them is the lack of access to childcare now and having to homeschool their children, often without the necessary tools that they need, all the while struggling to meet monthly expenses with very limited or no savings. And recent studies have found that low-income renters are particularly vulnerable to the economic impacts of this pandemic. An Urban Institute analysis, for example, found that these households are more likely to work in the 5 industries experiencing the greatest number of layoffs. You asked about rent collections, and national data indicates that the rent collections are down by approximately 5 to 10% in April compared to previous months. This is less of a decline than some had predicted, but it's still significant. And this drop is true for POA as well, but it varies across properties and locations. Many properties are facing much sharper declines in rent revenue, as much as 20 to 30%, due to tenants experiencing higher levels of unemployment or lacking rental assistance. In addition, in the coming months, we expect the situation to get much worse. While many renters have been helped by the CARES Act, and the chairman had asked about that, but certainly that's been true, and various other supports, we're very concerned about what happens once this assistance ends and the eviction moratoria at the federal, state, and local levels also end. The confluence of these events is likely to happen around September 1st, at which point millions of renters will be at risk of displacement and homelessness. Therefore, we think immediate action is needed at the federal level to provide rental assistance to help tenants remain stably housed over the next year, while also ensuring that owners can pay their mortgages, keep up with the local property taxes, and maintain their properties. I want to finish up by highlighting the need for new multifamily construction to meet the immediate needs and to help jumpstart the economic recovery. Harvard's Joint Center for Housing found that 5.3 million rental households were at risk and were cost burdened prior to the COVID-19 pandemic. It projects that this number will rise to 9.3 million as a result of the crisis. These are families with at-risk wages. Clearly, more affordable housing is needed to meet this growing demand. The good news is there's a healthy pipeline of projects that are shovel-ready. The financing markets remain relatively stable, and a strong existing CRA provides appropriate private market incentives. Of course, we hope that continues. However, there are funding gaps in construction budgets because of at least two factors: an increased cost to comply with COVID-19 construction standards, and I think more importantly, a drop in the 4% housing tax credit rate to 3.07%, the lowest on record. Compounding the problem is a reduction in housing resources from state and local governments, which are facing enormous budget deficits, as you know. Fortunately, there's a simple, quick solution. Congress could pass a minimum 4% housing credit rate. This was done, as you probably know, for the 9% tax credit rate several years ago. Doing so, along with increasing capital grant programs, would greatly expand affordable housing opportunities for the millions of low-income families and seniors who will desperately need it in the coming months. Thank you for the opportunity to comment.
Well, thank you, Aaron, and I'm glad you reminded us of what a vital role CRA plays in all of these activities. I am going to pause just for a second to see if any of my colleagues have a question, and then we'll go on to our final panelist.
Question on, you mentioned at the end support from state and local governments. Is that a big factor in these markets for affordable housing?
Very much so. And any developer trying to do affordable housing, whether you're preserving existing units or building new construction, you're tapping into state and local government funding, what we call soft funds or gap funding. And you're putting that together with the low-income housing tax credit resources at the federal level. So it takes a real partnership between all three levels of government and the private sector to get housing built. And when you pull the rug out from any of those, it's going to affect the ability of affordable housing developers to move forward and create more homes.
Thank you.
All right. And we're going to wrap up focusing on one of the segments that has been disproportionately affected by this crisis. As we turn to Nancy Lamond, who is AARP's Executive Vice President and Chief Advocacy and Engagement Officer. At AARP, she oversees government relations, advocacy campaigns, and public education programs. In the financial security area, Nancy leads efforts to strengthen Social Security and promote retirement savings initiatives, as well as programs that deliver unbiased tools and information to help people make effective financial decisions. So Nancy, last October, you spoke of the tremendous economic anxiety of older Americans who you said were already beginning to get more worried about the economy. How are older Americans feeling today, and how are they coping with the combination of the COVID crisis and the sharp economic downturn we're facing?
Well, Governor Brainerd, Chair Powell, and other members of the Federal Reserve, thank you for having me, and thank you. I've learned a lot listening to other panelists. Well, you're right. In October, in a very good economy, I commented how older Americans were beginning to get nervous about the economy, and I think probably without saying too much more, I can say they're even more nervous now. And AARP, as many of you know, is an organization, people over the age of 50. We have 38 million members. And during this period, we've done a lot of outreach to them. We do polling all the time. We do telethon halls every week. Typically 80 to 100,000 people are phoning in, sending us questions, and also our call center. So we feel as if we have a pretty good sense of what's going on. But of course, we can always do more, both to understand and also try to respond to some of the fears. I would say overall, the key thing is older Americans are very, very focused on the health aspects of the pandemic. I'm sure that doesn't surprise you. They are the most worried about themselves, but their anxiety isn't just for themselves. It's for their kids and their grandkids. They are, I should say, this is consistent in terms of some of the economic data I'll mention later, older women are much more worried than older men. And on almost every poll we do, every scale, women are about 10 or 12 points more anxious about both healthcare and the economy. They are taking precautions. If you look at any kind of indicators of self-distancing, listening to information. Older Americans are glued to their TV sets. They are online. They are reading more local information, and they're very focused on what public health officials have to say, very interested in kind of healthcare information. I joke all the time that if you ask an older person who their favorite individual in the world is, it's their grandchild, but the second most favorite person is their doctor. And it may even be a little more even right now. So as we go ahead, there's one important kind of poll figure survey that we're looking at, and that's kind of level of worry about lifting restrictions too early. And as recently as a couple of weeks ago, 3/4 of people over the age of 65 and 2/3 of people 50 to 64 say they were very, very worried about opening up too quickly, the virus spreading, and then people having to go back in. And we all look at a lot of indicators of consumer confidence, but I'm watching this one very carefully because I think people's comfort level about going back out. Remember, older Americans, half of them are financially very challenged. The other half do have disposable income. They travel, they're moviegoers, they're restaurant goers. And so I think we're all going to want to watch how comfortable they feel about opening up in light of what they're hearing about health concerns. Now, moving on to financial matters, which obviously are front and center for them as well. We're hearing from older Americans who have lost their jobs and are depleting their savings, struggling to pay bills, and managing with limited or reduced income. We have a lot of calls to our call center, more than you want to know, about people not getting their stimulus checks and having trouble filing for and getting unemployment. And so we're very active in that area. I would also say that, you know, we've run a fraud watch network for many years, and we have 10 times the number of calls every day that we did 3 months ago. And I can say there is one part of the economy that is growing, and that's the scammer part of the economy. And I think a number of organizations like ours are redoubling our efforts to try to help people during this time. Remember, this is a period where people at home and they're answering their phones much more than they used to. And so they're much more susceptible to scammers. We're watching the unemployment rate for people over the age of 50 and 55 is growing. It's higher for women right now than men, according to the data we've seen. And we think some of the longer term implications of this are that we're hearing a lot more concern about how long is it going to take me if I can get back in the labor force. It usually takes older Americans a little bit longer to get jobs when they've been laid off. And we're, of course, hearing about, are we going to be active on issues related to age discrimination down the line? So people are clearly thinking about what is going to happen when the economy starts back up and there is rehiring. It wouldn't surprise you that in our polling, people are showing dramatically more concern about their financial condition. If you're over the age of 65 and you're retired, you're, of course, very focused on your 401k plan. You're very focused on the stock market, very focused on Social Security. Remember also, retired Americans have benefited from the gig economy. We all thought the gig economy was built for millennials. Well, it turned out that older Americans were supplementing their retirement as Uber drivers, Lyft drivers. The largest growing cohort in the Airbnb world were women over the age of 55, wanting to have people come to their house, help them pay off their both mortgage and property taxes. So the retired community has suffered a little bit in ways you wouldn't have thought from the kind of cutback of part-time jobs. And then, of course, there's the pessimism we're beginning to see about, will I be able to retire? Will I really be able to count on what I had in my 401k being enough, and how am I going to move ahead? So I would say that older Americans are quite nervous in the current environment and anxious to see the virus under control so they can move back to at least somewhere close to where they were before.
Thank you, Nancy. So I'm looking at the time, and the sound does not sound great. Let me see if, given the few minutes we have left, if we can do a lightning round. Maybe we'll get through half of our panelists. I just want you to, sort of recognizing we're still in what could be described as the fog of war. I'd like to ask you nonetheless to try to look ahead and just to ask whether you think COVID will alter the landscape for the work that you do and the communities you serve, and whether you think there will be lasting changes as a result of this pandemic. And I'm going to start again with Amanda. Sorry for not giving you a chance to give some thought to it, but just a 45-second answer.
Sure. I think our collaborators around the country will be busy learning from each other throughout this recovery. Without a lack of sort of a national response, this experience has been very localized, and we're going to have these cities really rely on each other to come up with creative solutions. So, what can Baltimore teach Chicago? What can Cleveland learn from Pittsburgh? We're going to lead into industry partnerships. Industries are going to have to figure out the new normal, and businesses within an industry are going to have to work on some of those big looming questions. We will probably continue to support businesses to help them support their frontline workers through financial wellness programs so that they could better survive the next financial hit, or making sure worker voices are included in how to create a healthy and safe workplace. And then for us, they're sort of gigantic policy questions. There's no way to get out of this without relying on our public institutions to protect us from some of the economic harm that's been done. And we know last time that happened, when we had an unemployment crisis of this magnitude, we created the New Deal. And it intentionally left out Black and brown workers, and we're seeing the effects of that today. There's a reason why Black and brown workers are overrepresented in the service industry. There's a reason labor law doesn't cover a lot of their jobs. And as we create policies and think about the future, we just need to make sure we're not setting people up to be victims of the next crisis, and that we're rebuilding an economy that really works for everybody.
Thank you, Amanda. Duke?
Yeah, thank you. So on March 12th,
the NCAA Big 12 basketball tournament was canceled. On March 13th, the stagehands tore down everything they'd set up for that. All events were canceled from that point forward. None of them have worked at all in 10 weeks now. And I just saw on the news today that major concerts aren't going to start until sometime late 2021. So these are entire industries that most people haven't even thought about that are going to be impacted, and workers who are going to have a long, long time before they come back.
Thank you. Juan.
Yeah, education is going to be transformed. In the short run, it's very painful. The adjustment is very hard on many people, mostly on our students in inequitable ways. But I think there might be some opportunity points. We're learning the importance of households and families and parents in a way that, you know, we should have known from the very beginning and appreciated and tapped in greater ways. And so there's a depth to the relationships with families. There's a connection between teachers and parents that is greater and deeper than ever before. So I think if education takes advantage of the opportunity from the perspective of what the positive things that we've come from this, although, you know, the pain is very great. And so my concern is that we won't be able to, you know, sift through the pain in order to see the opportunity. But it's going to be transformed. That's my prediction.
Thank you. Darren.
Governor Brainerd, I couldn't agree more with some of the things that Amanda said. We're really concerned about the structural inequalities that exist in the current system and how they may be exacerbated through this. If this continues to last and the economy doesn't fully open, clearly we're going to be concerned about our asset quality. And that's something that we're going to be taking a very, very close look at. If consumers are not spending, then folks that pay mortgage and pay rents and things will have difficulty. The one thing I would say is that's directly related to the work of the Federal Reserve, the Main Street Relending Program that you guys have worked on. I applaud you for lowering the size limit from $1 million to half $500,000. I would say that the 4-year term is still problematic for some of our borrowers. That's probably too quick of an amortization period for them to still make expected cash flow. And then I would say as we continue, I do think we're going to continue to reimagine what banking looks like. We're moving, and before COVID, even more rapidly now, we're moving more and more toward a digital platform. So that has a very, very rich, innovative history. One of our founding board members founded the company that was precursor to what is Fiserv today. We own a part of our own core processor today, and we're moving very, very forward and aggressively in a digital platform, being able to provide financial products and services that are responsive and responsible in a digital platform to really focus on our mission at scale, so well beyond our Arkansas and Mississippi borders.
Thank you. Bobby.
31 years ago, and people started to have kind of what we would call a time-starved world, where people didn't have time to get the kids to practices, to go to evening meetings, because parents are working outside the home, no time to cook, and people are asking, what's for dinner tonight? And so with what's happened is a lot of people spend a lot more time at home. One of the questions is, with the social distancing issues before us, how quickly are people going to move back to this time-starved world? And what impact will that continue to have on their buying habits, especially for food? Thinking about what kind of consumer confidence will there be to go back to salad bars, to hot bars, to other situations where they're not sure of. And so somehow, hopefully we can all work together, and these things will not take as long as we might think it might, but it's going to be a challenge.
All right. I am actually going to hand it back to Chair Powell at this juncture because we are in the last 3 minutes.
Thank you so much to all of you. It's wonderful to hear from you, and in these very challenging circumstances. You know, we did have a tantalizingly good situation just a few months ago with a tight labor market, and we were hearing as what some of you said today, which is that opportunities were coming to low and moderate income communities that hadn't been seen in a long, long time. And so this is a hard blow. There's no question about it. But I would say, as a group, you guys are all about hope. You know, you're about lighting a candle, although I'd say we're also cursing the darkness a little bit, and appropriately so here. So, you know, looking forward, I do think it's important and we say this to ourselves too, we've got to keep it in context. You know, the economy will recover It will take time. But the main thing is we've got to get on, fairly soon, we're going to be on the road to recovery and making progress and moving back toward where we were. We're going to get there. It may actually not take as long as it feels like it will take now. I think, all of us need to work together as I guess Bobby said, we got to help each other through this. Somebody said that. We got to help each other through this, and that's what we're going to do. So you'll always have our support. We really appreciate the engagement with you, and thank you so much for being here today.